Hello, friends. Today is the 4th of January 2025. Okay, I'm going to talk about Venezuela. Perhaps you're already tired of hearing about it, and I think I'm going to talk about it from a somewhat different point of view. Uh, Yesterday, it was a very hard day for me. I felt um, desolated, and I had to ask myself why that was so, why I felt so down about what had happened. Uh, Coups and things in Latin America. This is not the first time. Why was I so terribly desolated? Desolated to the point where I felt, I have nothing left to say. I really. It got to the point actually when I thought, why am I doing this, posting videos and stuff? It's all nonsense, really. I really have nothing to add to anything. I really have nothing else to say. And for a moment, I even thought, and I wrote to my daughter saying, I think I'm going to give it up, this YouTube. Why? I have nothing to say. I'm stunned. I am desolated. I just, I kept repeating that to myself. And then I thought, well, this is obviously an overreaction about something. I have to think about it. Why am I feeling so down in this way? I'm sure that in a few days, don't overreact. I was going to say to you, I'm giving all these up. I was going to say to my wonderful members, please do not renew your subscription. I will go on for a little while longer because I respect the fact that you help me um, with your monthly donation. But don't renew it because I don't think I will be doing this for much longer. And then at the same time, this conflicting feelings of, um, well, don't overreact, don't say anything specific because, you will feel different in a few days. So I had a good night's sleep as opposed to the last night. I'm feeling a little bit better, so I'm going to walk you through why I've been thinking about it, why I felt this sense of utter desolation. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. I was just, I don't know what other word to say, is desolated really. So I want to be clear from the very beginning that this, what I'm going to say, and I will come at the end to Russia and China and the BRICS and Latin America and all that. But before I do all that, I want to make clear from the very beginning that I am in no way trying to defend the man or his government or an ideology. I'm talking about President Maduro. I know very little about it. All I know is that he was the successor to Chavez. And Chavez's main thing was that he told the Americans that the oil was Venezuelan oil, and he nationalized the whole thing. I have been listening to comments from Venezuelan and Argentinian and Mexican, Spanish reactions, and it seems that some people loved him and loved Maduro, and some people hated him. And one of the things Maduro continued with this is our oil, and we want to be independent of the United States, all that. But at the same time, some questions about other things that, for example, I don't know that this is true or not, okay? But these are the comments that I've been hearing that, for example, he encouraged this Santeria business, this anti-Catholic occult, witchcraft and all kinds of weird things. So you just don't know what to do about that. I don't know that it's true, whether it isn't, but in any case, there was some people loved him and some people hated him and so on. All right. So what I'm going to say is not in defense of himself or his government. I have no interest in rehabilitating anyone's reputation. What unsettled me is something colder and harder to name. It was the moment that desolation came, because it was a moment when you realized viscerally, not intellectually, viscerally in your gut, that being morally wrong means nothing to power. Talking about the United States here. In fact, it seems that certainly since COVID, raw power have embarked sometimes on doing wrong things. Wrong is a very general term, but you know what I mean morally. But they actually almost seem to enjoy it. I have spoken many times about, the leaders are there doing something without any degree of shame or nothing. Is in your face. It's as if since COVID we have been exposed to this continuous psychological shock and awe. I thought at some point, you see that even power, even the most powerful, sometimes when the thing was so obviously wrong that they would hesitate, at least in appearance. In other words, if they were doing something immoral or something wrong, at least do not make it so obvious. I think that was in the past. I think that now it's actually making it obvious to you, the powerless, to us, that they enjoy that. That they actually pleasure themselves, I'm sure, while they're looking at the rest of the powerless population, confused, terrified. What I saw yesterday was something that I had never seen. It was something, if I can put it in I hope I won't offend you, a sort of stark expression. The reaction of a child perhaps seeing an adult naked. Something that you're not supposed to see. I saw the United States of America and that power, naked, raw power, self-pleasuring raw power, supported by usury. It's as if that raw power got rid of its costume, of its clothes. And now I could see, like a child, all that was underneath. What happened yesterday wasn't extraordinary because it was unprecedented. It has happened many times in different ways. It was, to me, extraordinary because it was undisguised, unlauded, And once you've seen that, once the mask slips, once the person in charge doesn't know the difference between being dressed and being stark naked, you just can't unsee it. You don't get to unsee it. I thought that however little remnant, some of what I believed about right and wrong was still part of the world. There was something still there, a sort of a diffused uh, background assurance. I think it totally disappeared, that mask, with this raid. And what remains isn't rage, it's silence. Um, Charlie Kirk was murdered. Tucker Carlson seems to be the one speaking about these things, seems to be a little bit quieter. The young man Fuentes, that's so popular with young people, was there for years saying, yes, of course we should go to Venezuela and take the oil. It's ours. Um, and even if it's not, it's we are powerful and we can take it, that sort of thing. What? It is, he is flip-flopping a little bit. I haven't listened to him, but for other accounts, that he's saying, well, perhaps, yes, of course we should take the oil, but perhaps we shouldn't get engaged in directly governing Venezuela. Some commentators say that he's flip-flopping there a little bit. Candace Owens is not saying anything. He's on a break, but it seems that the attack on her is that she's now insane and all those things. In other words, there is really nowhere to go. I heard a neighbor saying yesterday, she was talking about Putin, saying what a terrible person he is. He keeps killing people and killing children, and he invaded this country unprovoked. And there is nothing one can say to that anymore. I have nothing to say. Nowhere to go. Perhaps retreat and silence again. Like I had to be silent for so long during the COVID thing. So I have yes, so I have to try to present to you to name this feeling precisely. So I've wrote a few notes here just to cover what I want to say. First of all, this expression that it's our oil, which President Trump repeated. He actually said that Venezuela, they stole our oil. Venezuela stole our oil. He said that in the White House, our oil. So in other words, Latin Americans' wealth in resources is our wealth. Perhaps the Amazon in Brazil also is supposed to be our wealth, our Amazon. God put the United States wealth in other countries. And since God put that wealth in other countries, that wealth belongs to the United States. Therefore, Venezuela stole US oil. And probably Brazil stole the Amazon from the US also, right? Yes, I'm a little bit facetious here, but bear with me because I have to deal with cynicism a little bit to be able to digest all this. It's the only way I can cope with it right now. What I am feeling is not anger. It's closer to moral vertigo, the collapse of fiction, the sudden visibility of naked power. As I said, this isn't about Maduro. We don't know at the moment whether there was an agreement. People are talking about it. Certainly the military didn't react. Why not? All that sort of thing. Could there be an agreement of some sort? Is this, I heard somewhere, is this just a theatrical performance of something? We will find out eventually. But what I'm concentrating on is this raw power. It's about the moment when the mask slips and you realize that what is right and what is wrong is not even, this is my point, pretending to be relevant. What troubles me is not who was seized or kidnapped. Some people insist on saying captured. But what was revealed, that is what important to me, what was revealed in the act of doing so. Power is not merely now ignoring morality. It has been doing that. Power has always done that to a large extent. But it is showing us and demonstrating that it is morality, what is right or wrong, is totally irrelevant. They are showing, they are telling us openly in our face that it is that nakedness, that proud demonstration of amorality, it was that left me stunned. It had done so in Gaza already, but I thought that was a specific case about a specific country. I thought it was a one-off. No, it seems to be the new system. So where do we go from here? I'm not being romantic about it. I think I'm being sober. I'm not saying this is wrong, therefore it shouldn't happen. I know that it does happen. I know the world is not run like that. What I'm saying is this happened, and in happening, it teaches us something devastating about how the world actually works today. Morally wrong now, to say that something is morally wrong is an illusion. Morality was supposed to be a force to at least, at the very least, restrain raw power a little bit. This demonstrated that it is not a force at all anymore. It is a language, and power only speaks it when it is useful. So, to me, something real has been violated here. What I am mourning is the loss of a belief. If a country is powerful, prosperous, or chosen, then resources anywhere in the world that are not under its control are somehow being stolen from the other people. That seems to be at the moment the updated version of empire. The British Empire, always more subtle, thought that those resources were being misused by the local population, so wasted. So we had to help them to use them. Uh, Now, of course, this is not economics, this is theology masquerading as realism. Historically, it draws from this, I have to say it, Puritan providential nationalism that God favors certain nations. There is a circular logic here. The reasoning goes like this. The United States is wealthy because it is virtuous or chosen or uniquely rational. Therefore, wealth in the world naturally belongs where it will be best used. And if wealth exists outside the United States and is not aligned with US interests, then of course it is being mismanaged and illegitimate or even stolen. Therefore, reclaiming is not theft, it's restoration. At that point, the nonsense, the circular logic is clear. Venezuela didn't have any oil. It was withholding US oil. Brazil perhaps doesn't possess the Amazon. It is sort of squatting there on a global or American asset. Ladies and gentlemen, this reductio ad absurdum is correct. What is even sadder is that this belief, this Puritan belief, this approach, I think they do believe it in some way, The ones who do not believe it, who empower and know it's nonsense, the bankers and the financiers and the usurers, always aligning themselves to, they always join themselves, attach themselves to the hip of a powerful country at any given time, letting that country do and letting it run dry, and then moving on to another. Might even sound reasonable to some people, I think, to say, no, this is our oil. Why so? Well, this logic survives because it survives because it is never stated like this, so bluntly, so foolishly, perhaps. Instead, it is laundered through words like global security and rules-based order and responsible stewardship and failed states, strategic resources. So notice how ownership disappears and management replaces it. Once you say that they can't manage it properly, the leap to someone else should control it feels natural. This has been, for the last 300 years, natural. It's not an accident. Notice the moral inversion. It's striking. Expropriation becomes liberation. Sovereignty becomes obstruction. Resistance becomes aggression. Theft becomes order. The sad thing is that God revealed his distribution plan privately to one modern state. And now we are in prophetic nationalism, which actually Scripture consistently treats with suspicion. Remember, Babylon thought it was chosen, Assyria thought it was chosen, Rome thought it was chosen. All were instruments for a time and then discarded. A God who always agrees with the strongest army is not transcendent. He is merely power, speaking in the first person. So did God make a mistake? The real error is not saying God acts in history. The error is saying our interests are identical with God's intentions. That's the problem. This is the oldest religious sin on record. In biblical language, it's called, and in religious language, it is called idolatry. Not because God is denied, that is something else, but because God is enslaved, localized, nationalized, and put to work according to the power's interests. The quiet counter-argument could be that, there is really a much simpler, almost devastating reply to this imperial providence. If God wanted the United States to have Venezuela's oil, he could have put it there in the first place. No coups, no sanctions, no sermons required. To claim otherwise is to suggest that God lacks foresight, or God needs covert operations or overt operations to correct his own geography. History suggests a sobering answer. Empires don't usually fall because God was absent. They fall because they were many times too certain that he was on their side. And given these power asymmetries, is moving on to a little bit of leaving the metaphors aside. Is sovereignty for Latin America nevertheless a viable strategy or a costly illusion? What do you think? So let me attempt to answer this geopolitically, not ethically, not morally, without, I hope, any romanticism here. Sovereignty could be, are you sovereign or are you not sovereign? It could be a false binary. It might not be so clear as to be a yes or no condition. It could be a variable negotiated across, several domains: monetary, military, technological, informational, diplomatic. No Latin American country, not even European ones, I don't think, country is fully sovereign in all of this, what I have just mentioned. The question is not total sovereignty or none, but which degrees of autonomy are survivable and are useful? Several options. Okay, option A, submission by Latin America to the United States, alignment with the United States. We cannot fight you, we'll submit, just, let's do what's possible here. This is the real default, whether admitted or not. What he would buy would be, to a large extent, security guarantees, explicit or implicit, market access, perhaps a certain regime stability for the elites, lower probability of sanctions, or coups, or kidnappings of presidents. So that would be perhaps a good thing. Just submit to us, we own you. Okay. The cost, what it would cost? Well, obviously, dependency. You're no longer able to speak for yourself. Policy ceilings, in other words, no independent monetary or industrial strategy. Elite capture, local ruling classes, the national presidents, prime ministers, or whatever, would become intermediaries, really, not governors, not real presidents, just intermediaries. As I think the European leaders are to a large extent, perhaps not so much, but another problem would be long-term underdevelopment traps. Geopolitically, this path would be stable but static. It would produce a certain order, but not very much development. The examples: Colombia, much of Central America, post-NAFTA Mexico, partial sovereignty retained but tightly bounded. This is, in other words, is vassalage. That's option one, to just say, okay, you own us, fine, all right, but we will retain some kind of autonomy in, local issues, kind of thing. Another option would be to actually, in the countries themselves, to unite a certain internal unity first, which is very difficult in Latin America, because whenever one country is beginning to do well, the forces there to break it apart always, and in the case of Latin America, is the racial thing. The natives, and that always breaks society apart in any country in Latin America. Very easy to use for those who want to manipulate the political landscape. And because the countries are kept relatively poor, then corruption and bribes and so on is very easy, really. But if some country were able to create this internal unity of knowing who the enemy really is, where, and look after their own country, by going against this anti-corruption, national consolidation. Wouldn't that be great? But this is often proposed, but often also misunderstood. The problem there, the trap, is that, as I said, poverty makes bribery rational. External powers do not rule directly. They don't need to. They only need to buy the veto players, as it were, and the elections and so on. This is why fix the corruption first in your country before you can do anything else. Fix the corruption first is usually advised from a position of power. It doesn't work because it assumes conditions that only power can secure. Conditions where power can play with and manipulate. And in any case, if you think about it philosophically, no region and no country became strong by first becoming virtuous. Doesn't work like that. Strength of the country, economic, whatever, the strength of a country reduces corruption actually more reliably many times than morality does. So this option would be, it's necessary, yes, but it is insufficient on its own. How about a third option, option C, if you're a Latin American country, okay, to become part of a regional bloc. Many people are talking about it in Latin America. There is a strong movement there and about a collective sovereignty. This is a region of the world that was carved up, yes, by the English and the French Empire. Little countries, yeah, easier to manage. So what about if they're saying, what about if we get together, like a civilizational bloc? And perhaps we can all together join BRICS and Russia and create be part of another bloc, because perhaps by ourselves it would not be sufficient. So become part of another bloc. Well, this is the only path really that has ever worked for medium or weak regions or countries. But it has to be described honestly. Why it could be a good thing? Well, no single Latin American country can defend its currency, protect strategic industries. I'm not going to go into the reason why, that will take us. But at the moment, for whatever reason, it is not in a position no country is in a position to defend its currency, protect strategic industries, negotiate fairly with great powers, withstand sanctions. I mean, the first time that in 2000, when was it, 2004, when Chavez in Venezuela came into power, immediate sanctions because of his stand on the oil. And I remember seeing very, very quickly the supermarket shelves empty. You see, socialism doesn't work. We know that socialism doesn't work economically, but so quickly, within a month, it takes a little bit longer to fall. No, the empties and the diaspora and people starving and whatever it was, that was because it was blocked, it was sanctioned to death. Yeah. No country can withstand it. No country in Latin America can withstand that. Pretty soon you have the people in the streets, yeah. Why is it so hard, however, to become part of this global, thing, united? Well, there are different economic structures, commodities versus industrial. asymmetric benefits, external sabotage. Yes, this is real. Internal elites in each country that benefit from fragmentation. Machado there. Never mind. But note something crucial here, that nevertheless, although there will be very many problems, unity does not need to be total to be effective. The EU, for example, did not start as a political union. Perhaps it's not a good example, but it did not start as a political union. It started with the coal and steel coordination of countries. Latin America, you see, repeatedly makes the mistake of aiming too high, perhaps a little bit idealistic. They have this grand ideological unity, simultaneous political alignment by all the countries together, symbolic institutions without enforcement power. And those fail and are allowed to fail. The real constraint is, I think, is timing, not necessarily morality here. Here is the uncomfortable geopolitical truth. Latin America is already late. It's late in industrialization. That industrialization window is mostly closed now. Technology, capital and knowledge intensive. The financial systems already dominated. Military leverage is asymmetrical. It's late to everything, but late does not necessarily mean impossible. It means narrow margins within which they have to operate. So the question is, can Latin America afford to dream of sovereignty? Well, perhaps we have to define or redefine what sovereignty means. What is not viable is, for example, anti-US posturing without leverage. That's sad. Ideological purity, expecting non-interference. What is viable, barely, is selective sovereignty. Start little, control over food, energy, some critical infrastructure, and tolerate dependence elsewhere. Or issue-based regionalism, for example, energy grids, logistic corridors, pavement systems, defense procurement, not flags, not anthems, systems. And then what they're not very good at is multipolar hedging. Never align exclusively with one great power. And here we have to be cynical. Trade obedience for concessions, not loyalty. The elite discipline is the hardest part. Not moral purity, but interest alignment. Elites must believe, their own elites must believe that their future is tied to the country and to the region, not to New York or London or wherever. So without that last point, sovereignty is impossible. So the final blunt answer, Latin America cannot afford the fantasy of absolute sovereignty. But it also cannot afford the resignation of permanent tutelage and vassalage. What remains, therefore, is a very narrow, uncomfortable middle path. Partial autonomy, constant bargaining, strategic patience, not good there, acceptance of constraints without, this is difficult, without internalizing inferiority. Acceptance of constraints without internalizing inferiority. That is not heroic, but geopolitically, it is the only game left on the board. I was thinking, well, okay, how about this binary one there? Okay, let's go to extremes. I'm just playing with this. Extremes that they say, okay, this is all too difficult. Okay, so, yeah, okay. So, United States, yeah. We are, we want to be like you. We would like to become another state. Let's say that extreme. And the other extreme, no, the Yankees, let's go to the BRICS and China and Russia. Okay, let's put it so. Just I was playing with this just to see where the fault lines are. Well, the first one is of course silly because they are never going to be accepted as different states. Not only for a few reasons that I'll tell you, but also because there is this superiority thing, okay, which is a racial thing. The Latin Americans are a mix. It's a mixed race of European and Native American. The North sees anything to do with Native American, whether they accept it or not, as inferior. Yeah, okay, so that is not going to happen. But let's say, how about united and become under the influence of the BRICS and Russia and China? But it seems that Russia and China are not really too willing to come to their aid either. I mean, I thought that perhaps one of them would say, this is, they didn't seize the moment. Oh, this is the time. Perhaps they had an agreement. You see, we don't know. But if they were willing to exercise real power in that part of the world, this would be the time when they would have had to seize the moment and say, hey, United States, no, you can't do that, and bring whatever. I don't know enough about it. But they're not. It's obvious that unless there is an agreement that we don't know about, they're not willing to get involved to any large extent that I can see. So the option one extreme, becoming part of it, okay, that is not a real option. Formal incorporation into, and these are the reasons besides the inferiority, superiority thing, but formal incorporation into the United States is neither desired nor rational for Washington. Not primarily, just as I said, because of this inferiority thing, though racialized thinking historically matters very much, but because vassals are cheaper than citizens, you see. Informal control avoids a lot of constitutional obligations. Extraction without integration is optimal. No, not a good idea for the United States. Latin America is useful precisely as an externalized space. Their resources without welfare, labor without representation, markets without a political voice. So, yes, to become part of, state, no. It ain't going to happen. It is structurally incoherent. Now, why option B, BRICS, Russia, that are becoming, together with them, looks tempting, and why it disappoints at the same time? The BRICS alternative appears like a counter. Some people see it as a counter empire, but that is an illusion created out of this symmetry bias. The critical point here is that China and Russia are not anti-imperial saviors. They are rational great powers. They do not offer security guarantees without return, certainly not China. They do not offer ideological solidarity without leverage. They do not offer development without control. So let's be blunt. Russia, limited economic capacity that they can offer. They are focused on their near, abroad but near, not the Americas. Russia could disrupt, but cannot underwrite Latin American sovereignty. Russia could sell arms, veto at the UN, provide diplomatic noise. They could do that. About China? China, remember, is a different civilization. By that, I think that many things that in a Christian mind we see as normal, even though we don't follow, but normal, it is not necessarily to them. Okay, let's see. China, in this case, would be a more serious, contender, but colder. China's logic is long-term resource security. Infrastructure we offer you for access. A good thing, we will not interfere in your political, we don't care who your president is. Political non-interference, as long as access is guaranteed, yeah? China will not fight the US for Latin America. China will not absorb sanctions costs for others. China will not rescue unstable regimes without collateral. For China, Latin America is a supplier zone, not a strategic core, and that is crucial. The uncomfortable truth is that for Latin America, poor Latin America, is that no patron is coming, no patron in the horizon. And this is part of what most people avoid saying. There is no external power willing to pay the price of Latin American sovereignty. Why? Because Latin America does not sit at the center of any great power's survival logic. Latin America is not existential to the US, it's convenient. Latin America is not existential to China, only useful. Latin America is non-existential to Russia, it's mostly irrelevant. And sovereignty is expensive. And only those who need you will subsidize you. So the real options collapsed the summary to their essence. Managed dependency, the current path, is predictable, is humiliating, is stable, is low growth. Option 2, risky autonomy, partial decoupling. You risk sanctions, elite fragmentation, short-term pain, long-term optionality. The option 3, internal collapse, followed by reordering, historically is common, morally is catastrophic, sometimes resets the board. None are good, perhaps only option 2, really, that risky autonomy, partial decoupling thing. Perhaps only that one preserves the possibility of future sovereignty. And the binary extreme options, that's of course false. The US encourages the binary in a certain way, us or chaos. Choose. China encourages a softer version, perhaps. China says, trade with us, but don't expect protection. Both benefit from poor old Latin America believing we must choose a master. But, geopolitics has third spaces. Transactional neutrality. It's a fancy word. You can play both sides. Multi-alignment. Institutional opacity. You don't always have to go around telling the truth about the terrible Yankees and ambiguity as a strategy. This is how Turkey survives. India survives. Vietnam survives. Dare I say Ukraine could have survived. Playing both sides. These ones that I mentioned, none are sovereign in the romantic sense. But none are vassals either. Russia and China are not too willing to come to their aid either. And that is so. Because aid follows leverage, not sympathy. until the time when Latin America can act collectively in limited domains, but collectively, until Latin America can impose costs, real costs, for interference, until Latin America can offer something that no one else can replace, it will be managed, not liberated. It's a hard sentence, but I think it's true. Latin America's problem is not that it lacks allies or friends or sympathy from the rest of the world. It is that it has not yet made itself indispensable to anyone, including itself. Perhaps I'll end with this. Perhaps maturity, political and moral, begins when we accept that power does not answer to morality, what's right and wrong, and that morality survives only because we continue to use it and speak it even when it has no effect. I don't think that's cynical. I don't think that's despair. Although I almost felt it yesterday, I think it's tragic realism. I wish I could end this by saying that what's right will prevail. Or that history bends towards something better always. Yesterday, I didn't feel like that at all. Yesterday, to me, felt like learning that morality is not a shield. It doesn't intervene. It doesn't even protest unless we lend it our voice. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy of growing older politically. Not losing our values, but losing the belief that the only thing that protects us is our own refusal not to abandon morality. I don't know what follows from this. Pretending not to have seen it, that lie to myself. I'm too tired for that. To lie to myself. No. Power and usury move on. Onward to the next war, to the next whatever. And all we're left with, or certainly I am left with, is the pain of having noticed it. That's it for me today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.